What's going on, everybody? Kalippa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Blue Bold N2 and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button, and if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Blue Bold N2, we're getting a 6.6-inch AMOLED display with a resolution of 1080p, a PPI of 390, an aspect ratio of 19.5 by 9, and a 90.9% screen-to-body ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 405, an aspect ratio of 20 by 9, and an 85.4% screen-to-body ratio. So in general, both phones do have really good displays, and if you're consuming a lot of content like watching videos, playing games, pretty much anything, and you're looking for more of a mid-range phone that's going to give you a great experience, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone here. That being said, between the two, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is a little bit better. First of all, with the Super AMOLED versus a regular AMOLED, the A53 5G is going to have slightly better image quality with a 20 by 9 aspect ratio versus 19.5 by 9. We're also getting a slightly taller and more narrow form factor here with the A53 5G, and while the difference really isn't that much, you are going to get a slightly more immersive experience in landscape mode and a better scrolling experience here too. And in addition to this, with a 120Hz refresh rate versus a standard 60Hz with the Blue Bold N2, the movement on the screen is going to be a little bit faster and smoother. So if you're watching videos, playing games, doing something with a lot of motion on the screen, you will get a slightly better experience with the A53 5G. And in general, this phone is going to feel a little bit more premium to use. But in general, again, while the display on the A53 5G is just ever so slightly better, the Blue Bold N2 at 6.6 inches versus 6.5 inches is slightly larger, and honestly, in every other way, it's almost as good. So again, if you are looking for a mid-range phone that has a really good display, either phone is going to be a great choice. Now for storage, the Blue Bold N2 is getting 256 gigabytes of internal storage with no microSD card expansion, and the A53 5G is getting 128 gigabytes, and we are getting microSD card expansion with this phone. There is another variant of the A53 5G that has 256 gigabytes too, but if you get this phone through a US carrier, it will have 128. So considering that, you could say the Blue Bold N2 does have an advantage here because 256 gigabytes is quite a bit of storage. But that being said, honestly, I feel like 128 is going to be perfectly fine for the average user. And if you do want microSD card expansion, again, the A53 5G does have it, whereas the Blue Bold N2 for whatever reason doesn't. So this is definitely something to keep in mind. For security features, both phones do have Face Unlock, and they both have in-display fingerprint scanners. So starting with the Blue Bold N2, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the A53 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners worked real well. And again, remember, both phones do have Face Unlock too, so if you want to use that instead, you always can. For the camera setups, with the Blue Bold N2, we got a 16 megapixel front-facing camera. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 2K in the rear camera and 1080p in the front. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we got a 32 megapixel front-facing camera. Then on the back, this phone has a quad camera setup too, with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. For video, the A53 5G has a max recording quality of 4K in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely nice to see here. In general, both phones have really good camera setups with pretty much all the features, so if you're taking a lot of pictures and you want a wider variety of features, then either phone is going to be a great choice. That being said though, with the A53 5G, I do think the quality is quite a bit better, so if you want the best photo quality between the two, then the A53 5G is definitely going to be a much better choice, not to mention the 4K video recording, because again, remember, the Blue Bold N2 can only record in 2K, and that's really just in the rear camera, whereas again, the A53 5G can record in 4K in both the rear and front. So if you're recording a lot of videos, then this is definitely something to keep in mind. When it comes to RAM and processor, the Blue Bold N2 is getting 8 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 810 processor. With the A53 5G, we're getting 6 gigabytes of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280. For overall performance, both phones are going to be pretty good choices for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, watching videos, stuff like that. Neither phone is going to have any problem with that kind of thing, but that being said, between the two, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is going to be significantly faster. So if you're going to be on your phone a little bit more, or maybe you're doing things like mobile gaming, for example, that needs a little bit more processing power, in that kind of situation, you will get a noticeably better experience with the A53 5G. Now, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, And here are the scores I got. So again, in general, as you can see here, the A53 5G does have an advantage here. But again, with the Blue Bolt N2, keep in mind, this is not a slow phone. And for the average user, for more basic activities, it will still get the job done just fine. For the batteries, the Blue Bolt N2 has a 4200 mAh battery. This supports 30 watt fast charging. And the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 25 watt fast charging. So with the 5000 mAh battery, the battery life and longevity is going to be quite a bit better with the A53 5G. So if the battery life is important to you, well, the battery life with the Blue Bolt N2 is still definitely not bad. The A53 5G is going to be significantly better. Another thing to keep in mind here is that with the Blue Bolt N2, this phone does only have Android 11, whereas the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G actually just today updated to Android 13. For whatever reason, Blue just doesn't have the greatest software support. So with that in mind, if having the latest version of Android is important to you, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is definitely going to be a much better choice, especially considering with Samsung's software support, you can also expect to get several other major updates for this phone in the future. In addition to this, unfortunately, the Blue Bolt N2 does not have NFC, whereas the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does. So if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, then in that case, the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G will have an advantage. Another thing I do want to point out here is that unfortunately, neither of these phones have headphone jacks. So if you have a pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, with these phones, you will need an adapter. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, in almost every way where there's a difference, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G is a better device. While the displays are almost the same in a lot of ways, the A53 5G again has a slightly better form factor, slightly better image quality with a Super AMOLED versus a regular AMOLED, and a higher refresh rate. Although again, to be fair, for the display at least, the Blue Bolt N2 really isn't very far behind, and at 6.6 inches versus 6.5, it actually is a tiny bit larger. In addition to this, again, I do think the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has a much better camera, because while both phones do have really good camera setups and pretty much the same features, the quality is a lot better with the A53 5G, and this phone can record 4K videos, whereas again, the highest quality the Blue Bolt N2 can record in is only 2K. The A53 5G is also a lot faster, it has a larger battery, a newer version of Android, along with better software support, and it has NFC, whereas again, the Blue Bolt N2 doesn't. That being said though, if we're just considering the US version of the A53 5G, then in that case, the Blue Bolt N2 does have double the storage, with again, 256GB versus 128. Although again, the Blue Bolt N2 doesn't have microSD card expansion, whereas the A53 5G does, so make of that what you will. I personally don't really think it's a big deal, but if you really do want to use a microSD card, then you might want to go with the A53 5G instead. But in general, because of those main differences, I personally do think the A53 5G is a better device. But that being said, the Blue Bolt N2 again is really not that far behind. And in general, if you're just looking for a solid mid-range 5G phone that has decent performance, plenty of storage, a nice display, and a good camera setup, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone. But this concludes my comparison between the Blue Bolt N2 and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.